The LA fire. A firefighter gave his life to save my daughter, and we lost everything in the flames. Our home, our memories, all gone in an instant. It's been days since Los Angeles turned into an inferno, and my home, reduced to a pile of smoldering embers, feels like a distant nightmare. Right now, I'm staying at a friend's place in La Crescenta with my 6-year-old daughter, who was this close to losing her life, along with my husband. We're up north, far from where the disaster struck, about 30 miles from the Palisades, where our cottage was burning down on Tuesday morning. I thought we were safe here, but with 6 active fires raging across the city, nowhere feels safe anymore. So far, the fires have forced over 179,000 people, myself included, to evacuate and lose our homes. Many of us thought we had found a safe spot, only to be forced to flee again. Our bags have been packed by the door here, just in case we get another evacuation order. As a climate reporter, I've been covering extreme weather for years, but now I'm living the story I'd usually report on. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was interviewing residents who had fled the Malibu fires, and now I'm on the other side of that story. The Palisades fire is already being called a historic wildfire, and it'll stay with me forever. It's the fire that burned my community, my home, and nearly took my daughter too. It started on the morning of January 7th. From the Palisades village, I saw small flames on the Santa Monica mountainside. I watched for a while as smoke stretched across the sky. Locals were snapping pictures of it. An hour later, the flames spread, jumping over ridgelines and began engulfing homes. The smoke was thick and I could feel the heat in the air. The Santa Ana winds had been a major concern, with gusts up to 8 temp forecasted. The lack of rain only made the situation worse, and the fire spread quickly. The wind blew embers and smoke across the town, and soon, the fire was surrounding the Palisades. It felt like something out of a disaster movie. The sky turned bright red, and ash rained down like snow. I always had thought our house would be safe since it was on the other side of Sunset Boulevard, away from the mountains. I never thought the fire would cross the road. But as I watched the news, seeing the fire spread further than anyone expected, and knowing how strong the winds were getting as night fell, which makes fighting a fire so much harder, it hit me. My home might not make it. The thought that I could be 6 months pregnant, with my daughter Isabella, who's 6, and my husband homeless, it was sobering. I rushed back home, started packing, and got ready to leave. The Sunset Boulevard, the only way out, was gridlocked. I packed the essentials first, passports, birth certificates, and when I thought I had a little more time, I started hosing down the front of the house, hoping it would keep my cottage, one of several around us, safe from the fire. We were ready, and we knew it was time to leave when they issued a mandatory evacuation order for the entire Palisades. By that point, the fire had already spread to the mountains right in front of my house, and I'd heard the winds were going to pick up even more that evening. We didn't get any official messages about evacuations or fire warnings that day, neither me nor my husband. We only found out from neighbors. I'm lucky to have a press pass so I could get updates directly from emergency services. I'm beyond grateful that everyone I know made it out in time. But so many people didn't realize how close the flames were to their homes because there was just no communication. Some of our neighbors evacuated, only to find their homes already on fire. They made it out with their lives but lost everything else. The frustration and fear in the air was palpable. We were still at home. Isabella was asleep in her room. I remember her telling me she was so tired, so I told her to rest until her dad came back. He had gone to find some gas. We'd already decided to evacuate, and I was packing up, deciding what to take. My husband kept calling, reminding me, "Don't forget the important stuff, don't forget the passports. Grab some clothes, we might never come back." His words kept ringing in my head, and they hurt more than anything. I had no idea what was ahead, but I couldn't shake the feeling his words were true. I had everything ready to go, but I didn't know that it would all be gone soon. I still think back to that one moment so clearly, standing in my bedroom, trying to decide which pair of earrings to grab, the gold hoops my sisters gave me for my 30th birthday, or a pair of handmade abalone shell earrings a Native American woman had gifted me after I reported on her community. I said out loud to myself, "Only take what you really need. What do you need?" And as I scanned my clothes, shoes, and jewelry, I realized in that moment, none of it really mattered. I grabbed my grandmother's ring, the passports, birth certificates, and nothing else. And I didn't even know then that everything else would burn. Lucy, our cat, was walking around, playing. She was Isabella's favorite, a little white cat with a pink nose. My husband was a bit late. I called him and he said he'd be there in 15 minutes. I still remember our conversation clearly. I told him, "I'll sleep next to Isabella until you arrive. Call me when you're near." I wish I hadn't fallen asleep. I don't know why I slept so deeply. I still think there was something in the air that made both Isabella and I fall asleep. Normally I sleep very deeply, and it's hard for me to wake up. I was in a deep sleep when I suddenly heard someone pounding on the door, and Isabella was crying. The house was filled with dust. I immediately knew what had happened. The fire had reached our home. I was in shock, unable to think clearly, and I couldn't even stand up. It felt like I was paralyzed. Isabella ran to the door and opened it. Through the window, I saw flames right outside. Our house was burning. It was mostly made of wood, so it caught fire so quickly. I was shaking. I still can't understand why I couldn't move or even stand up. My husband quickly realized I was in shock. He came in, hugged me, grabbed Isabella's hand, and took the bag I had packed earlier. We rushed out of the house. When I stepped outside, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It felt like we were in the middle of hell. As I said, we lived on Sunset Boulevard, and when I stepped outside, I saw flames and fire engines everywhere. In front of our cottage, there used to be about 20 condos. There were now just burning ruins. It felt like I was the only one who had been asleep, while everything else was falling apart. One firefighter came up to me and said, "Miss, we didn't know you were in the house. What saved you was your husband. You're lucky your cottage was one of the last ones to catch fire." I started sobbing, feeling ashamed of how I had been asleep, unaware of the danger. How could I have put my daughter's life at risk? The fire was mostly behind our house, where Isabella and I had been sleeping. The firefighters were all focused on the southern part of the neighborhood. That's when the disaster struck. Isabella suddenly shouted, "Lucy! Lucy! Mom, we forgot Lucy! We need to go inside and get her." I looked back at the house, now fully engulfed in flames. There were no firefighters nearby. We told Isabella we can't go back in, it's too dangerous, but she started crying, screaming for Lucy. My husband and I rushed to the car to put the things we had taken. But just for a second, I let go of Isabella's hand. She ran straight toward the house. I heard her calling, "Lucy, I'm coming!" My heart stopped, and my husband and I ran after her to stop her. As we reached the house, pieces of the ceiling were falling, and all we could hear were the voices of firefighters warning, "Don't go inside, it's not safe." But we couldn't stop her, she was already inside. We rushed in after her. Isabella was in her room, searching for Lucy. At that exact moment, a piece of the ceiling collapsed. All we could hear was Isabella's scream. The firefighters rushed in and pulled us out. 2 of them went straight to find Isabella. I screamed her name, crying and sobbing, but they didn't let us go back in. I collapsed on my knees, still calling for her. My husband fainted from the shock. Then the entire cottage collapsed in flames and dust. For what felt like forever, there was no sound. The fire was getting worse, and the smoke was thick. We couldn't see anyone, not the firefighters, not Lucy, not Isabella. I couldn't just stand there, helpless. I ran toward the house, desperate, and I saw one firefighter with an oxygen mask holding Isabella in his arms, along with Lucy. I rushed toward them, hugging Isabella tightly. She was sobbing, saying, "The firefighter gave me his oxygen mask. He died because of me. He suffocated from the smoke." My heart sank. I looked at his colleague who was crying. He told me, "I couldn't save him. I only managed to save your daughter. A big piece of wood fell on him. He didn't make it." I don't think he can even be identified. He was burned beyond recognition. He looked at me through tears and said, "Today was the day his baby was born. He hadn't even had a chance to visit his daughter in the hospital yet. He lost his life saving yours." I could barely stand up. A firefighter had lost his life. My house was gone and Lucy's paws and face were badly burned. Another firefighter had severe injuries. I couldn't stop crying. We were all overcome with grief and sadness. Isabella told me, "Mom, do you know what he said the last time? He said my daughter is surely as beautiful as you." And then he closed his eyes. I hugged Isabella tightly, still haunted by those moments. She still talks about the firefighter's last words, and I can't shake them either. All the firefighters, their faces covered in ash, kept apologizing, saying they couldn't save our house or our neighbors' houses. I was sobbing, thanking them for everything they had already done. Isabella was in pain from the burns, so I applied burn ointment to her skin before we went to the nearest hospital. It took a while to get out. The roads were packed with thousands of cars, all trying to escape the flames. It was so hard to look away from the destruction around us, especially seeing the school and some of our cultural landmarks like the local theater go up in flames. About 90% of my village has been destroyed. It's all gone. I'm still in shock, reeling from the devastation and the loss my community has suffered. Right now we're staying at a friend's house in La Crescenta. I'm still in a state of shock and depression. Everything I worked for, everything I loved, all my memories, all my belongings, it's all gone in the fire. What's still hard to come to terms with is how a firefighter lost his life saving Isabella. I can't forget that. We've planned to find his wife and visit her. We don't know how she'll react, but Isabella keeps saying, "He lost his life to save me. I want to thank her and his daughter." I don't think I'm ready to go back to LA anytime soon. It feels unreal. There's literally nothing to go back to. No home, no library, no stores, no kids' karate dojo, no theater, no community center. It's all just gone. Every day when I wake up, I can hardly believe that what was once my home is no longer there. I look at the streets that were once bustling with life and activity, and now they're filled with destruction and silence. I don't even know what to start rebuilding or where to begin. All the places, the people, the memories we built together, they now belong to the past. When I look at Isabella, I see that she feels this too. Even she sometimes is shocked by the sight of a city so devastated and empty of everything she once knew. She often asks herself, "Where do we go now?" And I can only answer sadly, I don't know. The future of our town is uncertain. And as a reporter who has always been in search of new stories, this is the most heartbreaking part. What hurts me the most is not knowing how we're supposed to start over. Maybe we'll eventually learn that home is somewhere else, maybe in some far-off future. But for me, home is still here, in those places, on those streets, in those environments.